Sign the resignation, or we terminate you for cause, revoke your severance, and I'll personally ensure your reputation in this industry is so thoroughly incinerated that you won't be able to get a job changing light bulbs at a gas station." That was the ultimatum Blake pounded onto the mahogany desk, his face flushed with the kind of arrogant, unearned confidence that only comes from a 30-year-old MBA who has never held a soldering iron in his life, but somehow found himself appointed vice president of operations because his father played golf with the chairman. Just 4 hours earlier, I had handed him the final, verified schematics for the Hyperion stabilizer, a piece of aerospace technology that my team and I had spent 3 grueling years developing, a project that was single-handedly projected to save the company from bankruptcy and secure a massive defense contract worth nearly $400 million. We had popped the cheap champagne in the break room, the kind that tastes like vinegar and carbonated sugar, and toasted to the fact that our jobs were finally safe, that the 18-hour days and the missed anniversaries and the cold pizzas had actually amounted to something tangible. "We're pivoting," Blake said, smoothing his tie, dropping one of those hollow corporate buzzwords that makes my skin crawl. "The company is transitioning to a lean operational model for the acquisition phase. We need to shed legacy costs, and let's be honest, Arthur, your salary is a legacy cost we can no longer justify. We have the blueprints. We have the prototype. We have the data. The heavy lifting is done. We can hire 3 fresh graduates for what we pay you, and they won't complain about working weekends." He slid the paper closer. "Resign, take the 6 weeks of pay and go retire. Or I fire you for insubordination regarding that purchase order dispute last month, and you get nothing." The room went silent, save for the hum of the server rack in the hallway, a sound I had listened to for 22 years. I looked at Blake, really looked at him, his perfectly coiffed hair, his soft hands that had never felt the sting of a welding arc or the grit of industrial lubricant, his eyes devoid of anything resembling curiosity or craft. He saw me as a line item on a spreadsheet, a red cell to be turned green. He thought he held all the cards because he had the title and the corner office. But Blake made the classic mistake of the incompetent middle manager. He assumed that because he controlled the payroll, he controlled the product. He didn't understand that in the world of high-precision aerospace engineering, ownership isn't 9/10 of the law, documentation is, and he had forgotten the most important rule of dealing with the old guard engineers he despised so much. Never declare war on the guy who knows where the bodies are buried, or in my case, the guy who knows exactly whose name is stamped on the federal patent applications. I didn't scream, I didn't flip the table, I didn't beg. I just felt a cold, hard knot of clarity tighten in my chest, a feeling familiar to anyone who has ever had to override a critical safety protocol to prevent a catastrophic failure. I reached into my jacket pocket, not for a pen, but for my reading glasses, and I looked at the resignation letter. "You're sure about this, Blake?" I asked, my voice steady, almost bored. "You want me to walk away, right now, before the Department of Defense audit next Tuesday?" Blake laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Don't try to leverage the audit, Arthur. The documentation is on the server. We own the IP. We own you. Just sign the damn paper." So I did. I signed it. I didn't sign it with my usual flourish. I signed it with the precise, jagged script of a man closing a ledger. "Done," I said, sliding it back. "I'll pack my personal effects." Blake smirked, already looking at his phone. "Keep it to 1 box. Security will escort you out in 10 minutes. I walked out of that office, past the rows of cubicles where my team, my engineers, the men and women I had trained, protected, and fought for, were still celebrating, unaware that the axe was already swinging toward their necks too. I went to my office, the one with the flickering fluorescent light and the stack of technical manuals that reached the ceiling. I didn't pack a box. I didn't take the photos of my kids or the coffee mug shaped like a piston. I took one thing, a small weathered leather notebook from the bottom drawer of my desk, and I formatted the hard drive of my personal laptop, not the company one, the one I owned, the one I used for off-the-clock conceptualization. I walked out of the building, the security guard, old Mike, giving me a confused wave as I passed the turnstile for the last time. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long time, watching the sun glint off the glass facade of the building. I had helped design. I felt a strange mix of grief and anticipation, the kind of feeling you get when you set a demolition charge and retreat to the bunker to wait for the countdown. Blake thought he had won. He thought he had cut the fat. What he didn't realize was that he had just severed the spinal cord of the entire operation. You see, 22 years ago, when I was hired by the company's founder, a brilliant but paranoid man named Elias Thorne, the standard employment contracts were different. Elias didn't believe in work for hire in the traditional sense. He believed in incentives. He had a standard clause in the senior engineering contracts, clause 14b, subsection termite, which stated that any intellectual property developed by the employee that resulted in a federal patent was co-owned by the employee until the company paid a specific IP transfer bonus equivalent to 5% of the projected first-year revenue of said patent. It was a clause designed to attract top talent in the late 90s, a golden handcuff to keep us inventing. When the company was bought out by the private equity firm Blake worked for, they sent in a team of lawyers to renegotiate contracts. They bullied most of the staff into signing new, standard agreements that stripped away those rights. But I had refused. I had told them I'd walk if they touched my tenure agreement. At the time, I was working on a critical guidance system, and they couldn't afford to lose me, so they grandfathered me in. They flagged my file as Legacy Do Not Disturb and forgot about it. They assumed, in their arrogance, that a 60-year-old engineer wasn't going to invent anything new that mattered. They were wrong. The Hyperion stabilizer wasn't just a tweak of existing tech. It was a fundamental redesign of the gyroscopic sensor array. And because I didn't trust Blake from the moment he walked in with his shiny shoes and his talk of synergy, I had filed the provisional patent applications myself, under my name, listing the company as the assignee pending the execution of the IE transfer agreement. The transfer agreement that required the bonus. The bonus they had just cancelled. The resignation letter I had just signed terminated my employment, but it didn't transfer the IP. In fact, by firing me for cause without paying the retention bonus or the IP transfer bonus, Blake had inadvertently triggered a default clause in the original filing. The rights to the Hyperion stabilizer didn't revert to the company. They reverted to the inventor, me. I went home, poured myself a drink, and waited. I spent the next 3 days gardening. My wife thought I was in shock. I told her I was just letting the concrete set. On Tuesday, the day of the Department of Defense audit, my phone started ringing. First it was the lab manager, Sarah. Then it was the HR director. Then, finally, Blake. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the messages later. They started calm, then got urgent, then bordered on hysterical. Arthur, we can't access the source code for the encryption key. Arthur, the DoD auditors are asking for the chain of custody on the patent filing. Arthur, pick up the phone. This is a legal matter. I didn't pick up. I made a sandwich. I watched a documentary on the Civil War. I waited until Wednesday morning. That's when I drove to the office of a patent attorney I had known for decades, a shark named Eleanor who ate corporate lawyers for breakfast. We drafted a cease and desist order. It was a thing of beauty. It stated that the company was currently manufacturing, marketing, and attempting to sell a device that infringed on federal patent number 10445B, solely owned by Arthur J. Thompson. It demanded an immediate halt to all production, the destruction of all infringing prototypes, and a surrender of all data related to my invention. We had it served by a courier at 10 a.m., right in the middle of Blake's all-hands meeting, where he was undoubtedly explaining my departure as a strategic restructuring. I wasn't there to see it, but Sarah told me about it later. She said a courier walked into the glass-walled conference room, interrupted Blake mid-sentence, and handed him the thick envelope. Blake opened it, read the first page, and turned a shade of pale that usually indicates impending cardiac arrest. He ran out of the room, leaving the entire staff muttering. By noon, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Blake. It was the CEO of the private equity firm, a man named Sterling who operated out of New York. Mr. Thompson, he said, his voice smooth like oiled gravel. We seem to have a misunderstanding. I don't think so, I replied, putting my feet up on my coffee table. I think we have a failure of due diligence. Blake tells me you've stolen company property, Sterling said, trying the intimidation tactic. I suggest you return the IP rights before we involve the FBI. I didn't steal anything, I said calmly. I invented it. My contract, the one Blake didn't read before he fired me, states that IP rights transfer only upon payment of the transfer bonus. You cancelled the bonus. You fired me. Therefore, the transfer is void. I own the Hyperion, and since you've already signed a contract with the DoD promising them a technology you don't own, I imagine you're in a bit of a bind. That's federal fraud, isn't it? Selling the government goods you don't have rights to. There was a long silence on the other end. What do you want, Arthur? Sterling asked, the arrogance gone, replaced by the cold calculation of a man realizing he's stepped into a bear trap. I want Blake gone, I said. Not transferred, fired, publicly, for incompetence. I want my team reinstated with a 20% raise and a guaranteed 3-year contract. And I want to license the Hyperion to you. License? Sterling asked. Not sell? No. I said, I'm keeping the patent. You can pay me a royalty, let's say 10% of gross. That's extortion, Sterling hissed. That's business, I corrected him. You wanted to pivot to a lean operational model. Well, paying royalties is very lean. No overhead for you. Ideally, they would have fought me. They would have dragged it out in court for years. But they didn't have years. The DoD contract had a delivery deadline in 30 days. If they missed it, the penalty clauses would bankrupt the subsidiary. They were over a barrel, and I was holding the hammer. By Friday, Blake was gone. Security escorted him out with a box of his personal effects, just as he had done to me. Rumor has it he tried to blame his secretary for the oversight, but the paper trail was too clear. His signature was on the firing notice. His signature was on the bonus cancellation. He had signed his own death warrant. I was invited back to the office the following Monday for a reconciliation meeting. I walked in wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. Sterling had flown in from New York. He looked tired. We sat in the same conference room. We sat where Blake had fired me. The lawyers were there, looking grim. They slid a new contract across the table. It was a licensing agreement. It granted the company exclusive rights to manufacture the Hyperion stabilizer in exchange for a 12% royalty. I bumped it up 2 points for the inconvenience. And a $2 million signing bonus to cover legal fees and emotional distress. It also stipulated the rehiring of my team and the termination of the Lean Operations initiative. I signed it with the same pen Blake had tried to give me, but the victory wasn't the money. The victory was walking onto the production floor afterward. The mood had shifted instantly. The fear was gone. My team was there, looking at me like I was some kind of wizard. We got back to work. We hit the DoD deadline with 3 days to spare. The Hyperion performed flawlessly in the field trials. The company made millions, and I made millions, but more importantly, we made a point. We proved that you can't treat the people who build the world like interchangeable parts. You can't replace decades of experience with a spreadsheet and a buzzword. You can't cut the backbone out of a company and expect it to stand. Sometimes the old guard isn't just dead weight. Sometimes we're the only thing keeping the roof from caving in. And sometimes, when you try to throw us out with the trash, you find out that we're the ones holding the keys to the kingdom. I retired for real 2 years later, on my own terms. I bought a boat. I named it the Claws. Every now and then I check LinkedIn. Blake is still looking for work. Apparently, executive operations manager is a hard sell when your last reference is a company that had to pay a multi-million-dollar settlement because you couldn't be bothered to read a contract. I heard he's working in sales now, pushing solar panels. I hope he reads the contracts better than he read mine. But I doubt it. Men like Blake never learn. They think the world runs on power and posturing. They don't understand that the world actually runs on physics, on patents, and on the hard, unyielding reality of a well-engineered trap. I still visit the lab sometimes. The new kids are bright, they're faster than we were, more comfortable with the digital tools. But I make sure to teach them one thing before they sign anything. I tell them to read the fine print, I tell them to know their value, and I tell them the story of the Hyperion. It's become a bit of a legend in the industry, a cautionary tale for the empty suits and a rallying cry for the engineers. It's a reminder that while management might sign the checks, we're the ones who make the numbers on them possible. And if you push us too far, if you try to steal the work of our hands and the ideas in our heads, you might just find that the machinery you rely on has a safety override you didn't know about, a kill switch. And we're the only ones who know the code. So, to every Blake out there, sitting in a corner office thinking you're untouchable, thinking you can strip mine the talent and discard the people, go ahead. Try it, cancel the bonuses, demand the resignations. But before you do, you might want to check the filing cabinet in the basement. You might want to look at the dates on the patents. Because you never know when you're standing on a trapdoor that was built 20 years ago, just waiting for someone arrogant enough to pull the lever. I didn't destroy Blake's career because I hated him. I destroyed it because he threatened my livelihood and disrespected my team. I destroyed it because it was the most efficient solution to the problem he presented. That's what engineers do. We solve problems. And sometimes the problem is the boss. The satisfaction didn't come from the check clearing. It came from the look in Sterling's eyes when he realized that for all his money and all his power, he was completely helpless without the technical expertise he had tried to devalue. It was a validation of a lifetime of work. It was proof that competence is the only currency that matters when the chips are down. I kept the resignation letter, by the way. Framed it. It hangs in my study, right next to the patent certificate for the Hyperion, a reminder of the day I was asked to leave, and the day I decided to take the company with me instead. It serves as a monument not to revenge, but to respect. Respect for the craft. Respect for the code. And respect for the simple, undeniable fact that you cannot cheat the physics of business any more than you can cheat the physics of flight. If you cut the engine, you crash. Blake cut the engine. I just made sure he was the only one on board when it hit the ground. Sometimes justice isn't a gavel. Sometimes it's a patent number, and sometimes, if you're patient enough, you get to be both.